All right, for more on this, let's now bring in Artisanal Mining Expert, Kgothatso Nhlengetwa. Kgothatso, a very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for your time. So earlier this year, the Gauteng Finance and Economic Development MEC, in fact, Lebogang Maile, raised the alarm about the escalation of illegal mining in the province in Gauteng, saying it's a serious concern. So as we get your reaction about this latest incident, it's becoming increasingly clear that there is a growing correlation between illegal mining and high crime levels.
Good afternoon and good evening to you, and especially good evening to your viewers. Yes, definitely. Crime and illegal mining are interrelated, especially because of the fact that illegal mining is a syndicate-based activity. As we know, unemployment rates are high, but not only because of that, it's also because of the high illegal immigrants that we find in the country. You do find also a correlation between illegal immigrants and those that are working within the illegal Zama mining that we see on the ground. So yes, definitely more crime, but that crime is linked to the high unemployment rate and high rates of illegal immigrants in the country. But it's also very important to note that the Zamas that we see on the ground are just the point. They are the individuals that we see on the ground. There are high key players in the hierarchy that are often not seen sitting in banks, corporates, and even in the political elite.
And I mean, when we look at some of the areas in Gauteng where they have been identified as problematic, areas like Langlaagte, at Zamimpilo, Rivoli, Salby, Dobsonville, Roodepoort, Florida, and Cleveland, and just listening to that clip previously with the police officers saying that there were actually patrols in the area. You do see some police activity. Of course, we know also there's an operation, a nationwide operation around this particular matter. But it's not a police matter only, is it? What else do you think needs to be done here?
Yes, it's definitely not a police matter only. It requires quite a collaborative approach. It requires, obviously, the law enforcement aspect. It requires the home affairs aspect because of the illegal nature of some of the immigrants. It also requires the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy because some of those areas, especially those that you mentioned, are a result of mine closure that didn't happen. So there needs to be people held accountable for why that mine closure isn't happening, and that needs to be done by the regulator, which is the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. And of course, then we also need to be in collaboration with research institutes as well as with organizations that work with artisanal miners, because artisanal miners are more community-based. And if you open up an avenue for there to be legal, artisanal, and small-scale mining, then you might find that illegal mining might be less of interest for people, but rather more on artisanal mining, where that can be done at a smaller scale for those who have the ability to do so.
I mean, every time we hear of these incidents, we are reminded of the Stilfontein mine rescue last year. I mean, over dozens of people, in fact, died in those mines, and hundreds were retrieved or rescued, with many of them concerningly being teenage boys. I mean, that really does highlight the dangers of the practice and just how widespread it is. But it also highlights, as you've also spoken about now, that there are kingpins behind these operations. Speak to us about what are we finding here in terms of those that are behind these operations, and are the reasons why it's not stopping?
Okay. So the main reasons why it's not stopping is because we have 5 distinct layers. So the first layer that we see, and this is like a pyramid really. So at the bottom of the pyramid, you've got the first layer, which are your Zama miners. These are often trafficked from countries like Lesotho, Mozambique, even sometimes we find that Swaziland as well. Then you have your second layer. The second layer are your gold buyers. You see them on the ground, sometimes selling mercury to the miners and also buying gold. Then the third level are the gold distributors. These you also see them buying gold, like you see these stores written gold for cash and things like that. So these 3 levels we can often see. But then there's a 4th and 5th level that we call the invisible line. This is the line where the gold goes from illegal to legal, and also that's the 4th level where you have these smelters. Then the last level is where you have these international buyers that buy gold, and at this level, we do not see where this gold actually ends up. For example, you find places like Dubai that don't have any gold deposits, but then produce so much gold. And you ask yourself, where does this gold come from? And often the case is it comes from African countries that include South Africa.
So if this is known, where do you think that the law enforcement authorities are falling short? I mean, especially because it speaks to cross-border at some intersections.
Well, Nati, I'm sorry to break the camel's back, but I'm going to say it even though I'm going to sound quite controversial. But the fact is there's a lot of political elite that are getting by and are actually benefiting from the fact that the status quo of illegal mining is as is right now as we speak. A lot of the international players, even the national players that we see in the illicit financial flows of South Africa, we find that it's coming from a lack of political will. And that lack of political will is because people are benefiting. This trade that we call Zama Zama mining is very complex and it is very lucrative. And because of this, you'll find that even people who are in high areas of law enforcement itself may be the perpetrators of this syndicate-based sector.
Quite concerning. I want to go back to some of the kinds of mining that we are seeing in this country. I mean, not all small-scale and artisanal mining is illegal in the country. I mean, despite it not being formalized. What role do you think the Department of Mineral and Petroleum Resources needs to play here? Remember last year they announced and actually gave a feedback on the ASM fund. I mean, how far do you think that will go, including, in fact, the policy frameworks around some of this kind of mining?
Well, first of all, I'll commend the DMRE because in the new amendment bill of the MPRDA of 2025, they actually did include artisanal mining, which for many of us researchers and organizations in this space, this really was a victory because we've been calling for it for decades now. But what needs to be done now is for it to become less about what's written on paper, but become more formalized in practicalities. So for all the cooperatives that artisanal miners that want to be formal, that are forming, let there be a leeway and cooperation between them and government so that when they try to apply for mining permits, these mining permits can be applied for and be applied for in a way that is legal and makes sense and is not so bureaucratic for the artisanal miner that might not be so well versed as a large-scale mining company. And secondly, it's just a matter of the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy knowing and understanding the practicalities of what is an informal miner and what do they do on the ground.
Absolutely. Kgothatso, thank you so much for your comments. Artisanal mining expert Kgothatso Nhlengetwa there for us.